This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Welcome. You've heard and read the spin the media and the politicians have put on the issues of the day. To get the correct spin on what's going on in North Carolina, let's introduce you to our panel of experts. They include former state senator and former chairman of the State Board of Education, Phil Kirk, syndicated columnist and author, John Hood, NC Policy Watch's Chris Fitzsimon, and one of our favorite journalists, Cash Michaels, with the Wilmington Journal and the Carolinian, and there's another one now. What is it?
Winston-Salem Chronicle.
Winston-Salem Chronicle. Well, this week's show, we'll talk about a new disease spreading across our state, election stress disorder. We'll discuss Hurricane Matthew's continuing impact and ways to help. And we deliberate over Blue Cross's 24% rate hike for Obamacare subscribers. And as always, we ask the panel to tell us something we don't know. Let's get started. Even those of us who are political junkies agree that we have what psychologists are calling election stress disorder. We've seen another fascinating week with more debates and the firebombing of the Hillsborough Republican headquarters. Cash Michaels, last Sunday's firebombing of the Hillsborough headquarters made national news, and both Republicans and Democrats in our state have been outraged. Democrats even raised about $15,000 to help rebuild and replace the damage. But what does this say about where we are? What does it say about the state of politics in our state?
Well, we're actually talking about two different things. The state of politics in North Carolina, as elsewhere, has always been rough, tough, and for the jugular, and as well it should be. What happened in Hillsborough last weekend was terrorism. So those are two totally different things. The reason why it made national news is because that's simply not the way that we conduct our politics in this country, let alone this state. They do that in other nations, obviously. Whoever firebombed the GOP headquarters may not have had really a political motive. We don't know who it is right now at the taping of this show. But we do know this, our politics, I honestly believe, had nothing to do with it. I think somebody knew that place was there and decided to use it as an excuse to do something wrong.
The assumption is that it was a Democrat or a Democrat supporter who perhaps perpetrated this, writing Nazis go home and so forth like that. If, in fact, that is the case, could it backfire?
Well, I don't even make that assumption. There's some people that think that it could have been a Republican that did it. But I tend to make the Republicans make the Democrats look like they'd done it or vice versa. So I don't think we really know at this point. I saw something positive, and that was Republicans and Democrats worked together on something for a change.
For a change.
And also, we've just learned that there have been shots fired into the Republican headquarters in Pamlico.
Wow.
County. So I'm hoping that it's not something that's going to spread in the next few weeks.
All right, we also had a gubernatorial debate this past week on Tuesday night. On last week's show, it seemed to be the consensus by most that Pat McCrory won that first debate. I want to go around the table very quickly and ask you who you thought won this past Tuesday night's debate. John Hood?
I think Pat McCrory won this debate also. Roy Cooper was a little better than in the previous one for whatever reason, but I think McCrory is just more comfortable in that environment. He also was pretty aggressively responding to Roy Cooper's series of attacks that have been lodged against McCrory for weeks. There were a couple of moments where McCrory said some things that, got challenged and potential vulnerabilities, but Cooper said almost nothing that was interesting. And in fact, there were a couple of cases where he was clearly flummoxed on taxes and education spending. He simply had no logical answer to the question, even though it was asked several times.
Phil, who won the debate?
I thought McCrory won, but like John, I didn't think he won it as decisively as the first one. I thought Cooper improved a little bit, but he's not a skilled debater, and the challenger usually has trouble with specifics.
Yeah. Cash, who do you think won?
I think Governor McCrory won. He's a super salesman, and indeed, in fact, he sells better than he governs.
Okay. Chris?
I actually thought this debate was a wash. I think maybe in the first one, Governor McCrory did a little better. But again, there's nothing in this debate that is going to dramatically change the race. And Governor McCrory is still behind, even though he's the incumbent. I thought Cooper made some mistakes. I thought McCrory left himself wide open on the issue of a secret meeting with Duke Energy, where he completely got the date wrong and claimed he was talking about vetoing a bill that didn't even exist. And for the first time, he said said he's for non-discrimination against LGBT people in the workplace, which he has refused to say this whole time, which would have been a huge help if he'd have said this 6 months ago.
Any other takeaways that anybody had from that debate? Significant takeaways?
There was some concern on the part of some on the Republican side that because the moderators associated with the station is owned by someone who supports Roy Cooper, that it would not be fairly moderated. I thought it was fairly moderated. And I also think that Cooper still, like in the first debate, was unable to really articulate what the state would look like if he was governor. It was a series of repetitive attacks, as it has been. That is, of course, what challengers have to do, but at some point he has to articulate a vision for the state, and I don't think he's done that.
All right, I want to move back to the national level for just a minute. The polls are showing Donald Trump has little chance of winning. He's been all over the media saying the election is rigged. I'd like to get your comment, Phil. You've been in politics for a long time on the accusation that the election is rigged and the impact that it might be having both among his following and among other voters.
Well, I'm not smart enough to know the impact, but I think it's ridiculous to say it's been rigged. I think when Pence explained that what Trump meant was that the media was trying to rig it. The media was biased in favor of
Well,
Hillary.
he said the media was in the tank for Hillary.
Well, and most of it is, but there are a lot of reasons for that. We could spend the rest of the program debating that one, but most of the media is usually for the Democratic candidate, and this time they have more reasons to be for the Democratic candidate than they normally do. So, but I don't think it's rigged in the sense that like in North Carolina, the Republicans control the election process.
I would like to go around the table and just ask if that is the consensus of those of us that are here. Has the media been unfair to Donald Trump and biased toward Hillary Clinton? John?
I think for the most part, the media has accurately reported what Donald Trump says and does, which is bad for Trump. There have been a few cases where they maybe jumped the gun, where they were unfair to him. That's usually happens to any candidate. The bigger problem is the lack of follow-up on Hillary Clinton. I think that's much more significant than misreporting about Trump.
All right. So, Chris, has the media paid enough attention to Hillary and WikiLeaks?
I don't think the media has paid enough attention to what's happening in the country and talked about the issues. And on the other hand, however, I heard a Washington Post reporter recently on one of the panel discussions talk about, so if the presidential candidate for one of the two major parties in the United States gets up at 3:30 in the morning and is tweeting outrageous and obnoxious things, it is a news story. I mean, and if audio and videotape come out with him saying unbelievably offensive things, that's a news story. I mean, Trump has sort of made it difficult to talk about the issues because he's so outrageous and ridiculous. He's dominating the media coverage, and for him, that's bad because it's all bad.
Yeah.
I don't think the media's been unfair to Trump. I think they've reported what he said, which, like Chris said, is bad enough. I agree with John. I think where they're not as aggressive on follow-up with Hillary, and I think it's a double standard.
Cash, this past Thursday, early voting starting in North Carolina. Are you expecting a large turnout of people who want to go ahead and get it done, get it out of the way, or what are you expecting as far as early voting?
Absolutely. We've waited. We are waiting for Election Day. It's started already as of Thursday. You have Souls of the Polls on this Sunday. Lots of folks going to that. Folks are waiting they want to have something to say about Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton.
We talked at the beginning of the segment about this ESD, election stress disorder. Do you agree that that's a problem, and how might it affect the turnout? Are people just going to be fed up with it and not vote at all?
That is what some are considering as a possibility, that turnout will not be as high as expected. It's important for people to understand that the only known cure for this disorder is watching NC Spin, because then you understand what's going on.
Thank you, John. I hope we have that on tape. I want to remind you that one more time to join our good friend and panelist Rufus Edmiston for a benefit to help students in our area, what Rufus likes to call Super Kids. This year the benefit's going to be Thursday, October 27th at the Farmers Market Restaurant. Your $50 admission includes an incredible buffet dinner, drinks, and a wonderful silent auction. You can learn more by emailing rufus@rufusedmiston.com or by calling 919-829-1988. I hope you'll join me and many of our other NC Spin panelists October 27th at the Super Kids benefit. When we come back, we'll talk about cleaning up after Matthew.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
Vote. This single word is vital to the future of our nation. In the coming weeks, you will have the opportunity to cast your vote. It's your chance to shape the future of your community, state, and country. It's your chance to make your voice heard. I'm asking you as a fellow North Carolinian to encourage every family member, friend, and neighbor to cast their vote. On Tuesday, November the 8th, be a part of our future and go vote.
I help educate and inspire visually impaired students to strive for a brighter future.
I make sure visitors to the North Carolina Zoo take a walk on the wild side.
And I make sure that the fuel you buy is a quality product from pipeline to pump.
I support small businesses in North Carolina by matching them with hard-working, well-trained employees.
I make sure the roads you drive on are safe.
Scenic, the one voice speaking in support of the men and women who are making North Carolina great.
You sign up, you ship out, you serve, deployments get longer, families stretch thinner, all for our freedom. Obama doesn't get it. Hillary's even worse. They pretend we're not at war, put you in harm's way, and forget about you when you get home. It's a disgrace. My most sacred responsibility is to make sure we keep our promise. Let's restore the strength of our military and free veterans from a failed VA. Go to any doctor you want. You've earned it. I'm Richard Hudson, and I approve this message.
We now return to NC Spin.
North Carolina had the most fatalities and damage from Hurricane Matthew. Last week, we saw people finally able to get back into their homes and businesses. And to ascertain the full amount of their damage, Governor McCrory gave a preliminary estimate of more than $1.5 billion in damages. But the final numbers are likely to be much higher. Phil, in times of disasters, we see both the best and the worst of humankind. There were reports of unscrupulous people scamming and price gouging victims, but also a tremendous number of people who responded by performing acts of humanity to furnish clothing, food, help, even rescues. What's your assessment of how well our state responded to this disaster?
I tend to focus on the positives, and I've long felt that state government does the best job on handling disasters, and by that I mean local, state, and federal officials seem to work together better and more effectively, not as Republicans or Democrats, but as North Carolinians. And the governor's announced that former Governor Beverly Perdue has called and offered to help, and he's going to use her to help with some of the efforts. But their government money, it's a partnership, public-private partnership, and the hard work is just now starting with the assessment now that the water started to go down. But I think North Carolina has done, as usual, has done a very good job.
Chris, what could be done about those people who are price gouging and scamming? Is there anything?
Well, we have laws against it, and the Attorney General's office, I think, is seeking to enforce that law. The Attorney General Cooper has made many statements about it before this happened.
So if someone feels like that's happened to them,
report that to Consumer Protection Division in the North Carolina Attorney General's office.
Okay,
absolutely, and I agree with Phil. I think that so far. I think everybody, for the most part, not everybody, I do think people have chipped in and done a good job. And the real struggle now is how to help people who were displaced from people in Robinson County, been moved to Fayetteville, the town of Princeville's underwater, a lot of other areas. People have lost their homes, and they're going to need help, not just recovering from the disaster immediately and having something to eat and a place to sleep, but rebuilding their lives in the weeks and months to come.
Governor McCrory gave that preliminary estimate of $1.5 billion, but that was primarily just for buildings and didn't include personal belongings and effects, and it did not include the damage caused to crops to our farmers. Does this storm look to be as devastating as what we saw with Hurricane Floyd? How do you compare it, Cash? You were around then.
Yeah, I think more so. And I remember Floyd very well. And it turned this state literally upside down, so did Hurricane Fran. But Floyd was devastating. The total price, the final price tag on that was around $836 million. This storm is going to cost us, I think, upwards of $2 billion without question, given all of the damage, all of the flooding, decisions as to whether or not we should rebuild where the flooding originally took place and what have you. This one's going to be very expensive.
John, our good friend, WRAL meteorologist Greg Fishel spoke to the fact that by the time Hurricane Matthew hit us, it was a Category 1. It had been downgraded to a Category 1 storm. But just saying Category 1 doesn't reflect wind damage and storm surge and flooding. Is it time that nationally our weather service and people in the Hurricane Center and so forth come up with some better ways of warning us in advance about the possibility of surges and floods?
Well, I think that the Category 1, 2, 3 type of system tends to tell you more about the power of the storm, which tells you about the potential wind damage. Wind damage is the most dramatic, it's the most immediate, it's the most visceral and visual way that a hurricane can do damage. We know in North Carolina, in most of the recent storms that have caused damage, it's been flooding. It's been water coming up later, not the immediate wind damage that was our bigger problem. So I think people knew that. This didn't come out of the blue. People heard about the storm. The state was, I think, relatively well prepared for the storm. But you can never be prepared. Some of the flood events that occurred were not predicted. Some rivers didn't flood as much as people thought. Some rivers flooded more than people thought. The best news we have is that North Carolina did have some sound judgment over several years, building up a rainy day fund of $1.6 billion, the largest rainy day fund we've ever had, plus hundreds of millions of dollars in other reserves. We are prepared financially for the storm in a way that we haven't been in previous situations.
And we want to just, again, tell our viewers and listeners that much more help is needed. And we have been just absolutely proud of the fact so many people as individuals and organizations have tried to help and in fact have helped. Television stations have run food drives and financial campaigns. You can still contribute to the Salvation Army. You can contribute to food banks. You can contribute to a lot of clothing drives that are sure to be held. People are going to need furniture. They're going to need money. They're going to need a lot of help as we go forward with this campaign. Even though the headlines may have faded, the need is still there. Okay, after these messages, we're going to talk about rate increases for Obamacare.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
Helping people. It's all in a day's work for Wayne Goodwin. As Commissioner of Insurance, Wayne Goodwin's been a tireless advocate for North Carolina families, helping more than 100,000 seniors enroll in the Medicare drug plan while protecting them from insurance scams. And Wayne Goodwin has been fighting big insurance companies' proposals to raise rates for car, home, and health insurance. Wayne Goodwin, more than a public servant, a true friend for consumers.
You sign up, you ship out, you serve. Deployments get longer, families stretch thinner, all for our freedom. Obama doesn't get it. Hillary's even worse. They pretend we're not at war, put you in harm's way, and forget about you when you get home. It's a disgrace. My most sacred responsibility is to make sure we keep our promise. Let's restore the strength of our military and free veterans from a failed VA. Go to any doctor you want. You've earned it. I'm Richard Hudson, and I approve this message.
You sleep on concrete till your body get immune to concrete.
My mom got my brother and I up and said, come on, we're leaving.
I became homeless in the beginning of this year.
When I was about 4 or 5 years old, our house caught fire.
I used to see my brother. If he see me, he'd turn and go the other direction.
We did the only thing that we could think of, and we went to a Salvation Army shelter.
You know, we don't have this, like, what's your background look like? We just say, what do you need?
I remember the man from the Salvation Army coming down with a box of clothes.
The Salvation Army officer bought my brother and I an ice cream cone.
Last week, my brother walked up to me, and he just started a conversation.
Today, I've given my life to the Salvation Army because I remember what somebody did for me, my brother, and my mom over 30 years ago.
The Salvation Army for me means hope.
Compassion.
Family.
Support.
We now return to NC Spin.
Earlier this year, Blue Cross announced they had lost over $400 million insuring people under the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare. We saw large insurance companies pulling out of our state, leaving Blue Cross as the only one insuring ACA patients across the state. Blue Cross announced this week they would be raising premiums on ACA plans by an average of 24.3%. John, state leaders have been criticized for not setting up our own state insurance exchange, opting instead for the federal exchange. They say that it made it more difficult for more insurance companies to compete in our state, therefore lowering rates. How accurate is this accusation, and should we be doing something about it?
It's not accurate at all. It is certainly true that North Carolina, like most states, deferred to the federal exchange, federally set up exchange, rather than trying to set up their own. But the states that have state-run exchanges have problems in this market, too. It is a fundamental problem of the structure of the Affordable Care Act. It isn't one state doing it different from another. The Affordable Care Act was not set up for this market to survive in the long run, because relatively healthy young people have no incentive to buy. They're going to get penalized if they don't buy these plans, but the penalty is way less than paying the premiums. Now, it's important to remember that the rate increase, which is substantial, comes on top of last year's rate increase, one of the largest in the nation in North Carolina. But a lot of people don't actually see that in their bill because the federal government, in other words, taxpayers, pay for these rate increases. So some people are going to buy the plans anyway because they're only paying a percentage of the dollar. Here's my thing about this. Affordable Care Act in North Carolina, depending on how you ask the question, is usually more unpopular than HB 2. And it seems to me that Roy Cooper and others who keep attaching themselves to Obamacare are making a big political mistake.
That's ridiculous in a way. If you ask people in North Carolina, do you think kids should be denied coverage if they have cancer? People say no. Do you think you should be denied if you have a pre-existing illness? They say no. Would you like your kids to stay on your plan until they're 26? They say yes. Many parts of the Affordable Care Act are very popular, unlike HB 2, which hardly any parts are popular, number one.
Actually,
and number two,
the core issue about bathrooms, the public still agrees with the HB 2
There's a whole bunch of other stuff in HB 2. Well, so it's not the only thing. Number two, when you see a headline that says the rates are going up 24%, the vast majority of people watching NC-SPIN, their rates are going up nowhere near 24%, even if they have Blue Cross. You know why?
Because there's an average of 24%.
No, they're employer-based care. They're the 3.9 million people Blue Cross insures through employer plans which aren't going up 24%. 90% of the people that get under the ACA get a subsidy. John mentioned that. They're not going to go up 24%. So it's not. It's a little misleading.
Those rates are still going up 24%.
It's not off topic to say that they're not going up 24%.
They certainly are.
We're off topic. Here's the thing, Phil, that a lot of people are questioning about this. Obviously, the Republicans have tried to repeal Obamacare. They can't do it. The Democrats agree that it needs some revisions. But with Congress being gridlocked, nothing is done. Do you anticipate changes to ACA regardless of who wins the presidency?
Well, that's hard to know because Bill Clinton said it's a big disaster. He said that a couple weeks ago, so I don't know what influence he's going to have on what President Clinton
context, actually. He later talked about it.
I'm sure they haven't ever done that
to Bill Clinton. He did criticize the bill, but his solution was to expand Medicare and Medicaid more.
Right.
So it wasn't exactly a conservative critique of
I think there has to be a solution, but I don't know what it is.
And this always raises the question of should we expand Medicaid cash? Should that be coupled with Obamacare?
Well, you know, we find it very troubling that here it is, we have a governor who's vowed to help the poor people who were impacted by Hurricane Matthew, and yet he has not shown the same kind of concern for them.
We're not talking about Pat McCrory. We're talking about should we expand Medicaid?
All right, then let me set
That's my question.
Let me set something straight. Let me set something straight about history. Before Beverly Perdue left office, she said that North Carolina would partner with the federal government on ACA. When Pat McCrory came in, he said, no, we're not going to do that. So he's at the center of a lot of this.
Should we expand Medicaid? That's the question I asked.
Absolutely.
That's what I wanted an answer to. After these messages, we're going to ask the panel to tell us something we don't know.
NC Spin is brought to you in part by the North Carolina Farm Bureau. The Farm Bureau and Agriculture. We keep North Carolina growing.
The cost of everything has gone up dramatically over the last 75 years. With one exception, keeping electricity affordable. That's the power of your co-op membership. Learn more at togetherwesave.com.
North Carolina's Touchstone Energy Cooperatives, looking out for you.
It's a fact. Patients who receive care in the medical home from a trusted family physician reduce healthcare costs through prevention, early detection, and affordable management of high-cost chronic diseases.
Every dollar invested in healthcare matters. Let's invest them wisely, building on North Carolina's medical home model. Better health begins with a medical home, a trusted family physician, the best return on our healthcare investment. Learn about the importance of medical homes at ournchealthcare.com.
I help educate and inspire visually impaired students to strive for a brighter future.
I make sure visitors to the North Carolina Zoo take a walk on the wild side.
And I make sure that the fuel you buy is a quality product from pipeline to pump.
I support small businesses in North Carolina by matching them with hard-working, well-trained employees.
I make sure the roads you drive on are safe.
Scenic, the one voice speaking in support of the men and women who are making North Carolina great.
We now return to NC Spin.
Now it's time to ask the panel to tell us something we don't know. Cash Michaels, will start with you.
Tom, in the last two general elections, 2008 and 2012, out of all groups in early voting, black women led all groups when it came to going to the polls during early voting, and I predict that for 2016 general election, black women will lead all groups again in early voting.
Did not know that. Interesting. Chris, tell us something we don't know.
Well, some folks spend a lot of time bashing government, how government is run. This past week, we found out the City of Raleigh Utilities Division is one of 14 cities in the United States of America that has a AAA bond rating from all three credit agencies. Moody's just gave them a AAA, so the good work. The folks who run the City of Raleigh, they're spending our money wisely.
Not a lot of municipalities have that.
That's right.
Either. All right, John, tell us something we don't know.
Well, the governor's race is tightening, and I thought it might be interesting to quickly explain that. During the summer, the Cooper was leading 49-44 in an average of polls. By the time we get into September, early October, it was 47-44. Cooper's still in the lead. Now it is 47-47. What has changed in the last 2 weeks? A variety of things, but primarily the hurricane, the coverage of the hurricane. The largest gains for McCrory's in terms of job approval have been in the eastern part of the state, in the Triangle area, the places most affected by the hurricane. That doesn't necessarily mean that he's going to win, but it has tightened.
All right, Phil, tell us something we don't know.
Vice presidential candidate Tim Kaine was in North Carolina earlier this week and criticized North Carolina's voting. So how our voting laws are so restrictive and discriminatory. So I called Virginia State Board of Elections. Number one, they do not have early voting in Virginia. Number two, they have voter ID in Virginia. And number three, they have very restrictive absentee ballot voting. You can only vote absentee ballot if you're going to be out of town, or sick. So which states are discriminatory?
The pot calling the kettle black, is that it?
I wouldn't go that far.
All right, well, you've heard our spin on the issues of the day. To stay informed all during the week, give your feedback, and read my weekly column, visit our website, ncspin.com, or catch NC Spin on Facebook. Join us next week where we'll have more balanced debate for the Old North State. Until then, stay informed and watch out for the spin.
Join us next week and get the spin on issues facing our state.